He thought his badge gave him unlimited power over a suspicious black woman driving through his district. But Colonel Sarah Mitchell had commanded troops in combat zones. A small-town cop's intimidation tactics were child's play compared to what she'd survived. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. as Colonel Sarah Mitchell drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Georgia. She was returning from a late meeting at Fort Stewart, still wearing her dress uniform beneath a civilian jacket. The small town was a necessary route home, though she always felt the familiar tension that came with being a black woman driving through certain areas after dark. Behind her, blue lights suddenly flashed. Sarah checked her speedometer, 34 miles an hour in a 35 zone. Her hands moved to the steering wheel in the 10 and 2 position. Muscle memory from years of military training kicking in. She activated her phone's voice recorder and pulled over calmly. Sergeant Mike Reynolds sat in his patrol car for a full 3 minutes before approaching, a deliberate power play he'd perfected over his 15-year career. At 42, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his badge made him untouchable in this small Georgia town. He'd made similar stops countless times, and they usually ended with the driver properly intimidated and himself feeling satisfied with his authority. Tonight would be different. Reynolds approached the driver's side window, his hand resting on his service weapon, another intimidation tactic. He shined his flashlight directly into Sarah's face, temporarily blinding her. "License and registration," he barked without preamble. "Good evening, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop?" Sarah's voice was calm, professional. "I'll ask the questions here. License and registration." Now, Sarah reached slowly into her glove compartment. "Officer, I'm reaching for my documents. I'm also required to inform you that I'm recording this interaction for safety purposes." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Turn off that recording." "Sir, I have the legal right to record this stop." "I said turn it off." His voice rose. "What are you trying to hide?" Sarah remained calm. "Nothing, sir. I'm simply exercising my constitutional rights." Reynolds studied her through the window. Something about her composure irritated him. Most people he pulled over were nervous, apologetic. This woman sat straight-backed, alert but unafraid. Her calm confidence felt like a challenge to his authority. "Step out of the vehicle." "May I ask why?" "Because I'm telling you to." "I don't need a reason." Sarah complied, her movements measured and deliberate. She stood at military attention without thinking about it. Shoulders back, chin up, hands at her sides. "Turn around, hands on the car." "Officer Reynolds," she said, reading his name tag. "What is the probable cause for this search?" His eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" "It's on your badge, sir. Don't get smart with me." He stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. "You were driving erratically." "Sir, with respect, I was driving 34 miles per hour in a 35 zone. I maintained my lane and used proper signals." "Are you arguing with me?" "No, sir. I'm simply stating fact." Reynolds felt his authority being questioned, and it enraged him. In his experience, people like her were supposed to be submissive, apologetic. This woman's calm defiance felt like a personal insult. Hands on the car. Now. Sarah placed her hands on the vehicle, maintaining her dignity even in this humiliating position. Reynolds began an unnecessarily aggressive pat-down, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. "What's in your pockets?" "Car keys, sir." "What else?" "Nothing else." "You lying to me?" "No, sir." Reynolds continued his search, growing frustrated by her composure. Most people would be nervous, angry, or pleading by now. This woman remained as steady as a statue. "What do you do for work?" he asked, fishing for information he could use against her. "I work for the federal government." "Doing what?" "Administrative work." It wasn't technically a lie. Command was administrative, in a sense. "Government, huh?" Reynolds smirked. "Let me guess. Welfare office?" Sarah didn't respond, which only irritated him further. "I asked you a question. You made a statement." "Not asked a question, sir. Don't get cute with me." He grabbed her arm roughly. "I can make this a lot harder for you." For the first time, Sarah's military training fully activated. She'd been grabbed by enemy combatants who wanted to kill her. The small-town cop's intimidation tactics were indeed child's play. "Sir, you're now on video, assaulting me." without cause. I recommend you reconsider your actions. Are you threatening me? No, sir. I'm advising you that your behavior is being documented. Reynolds realized the phone was still recording. His anger flared. I told you to turn that off. And I told you I have the right to record. Not anymore, you don't. He reached for the phone. Sir, that's destruction of evidence and violation of my civil rights. Reynolds paused. Something in her tone, not fear, not anger, but absolute certainty, made him hesitate. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed, not intimidated. Who do you think you are? He snarled. Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. I'm someone who's been in much worse situations than this, Sergeant. The way she said Sergeant, with both respect and subtle correction, made him realize she knew military ranks. But her calm authority unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Get back in your car, he said finally. I'm writing you a citation. For what violation? Failure to maintain lane. Sir, I maintained my lane throughout my drive. That's not what I observed. Reynolds returned to his patrol car and sat there for 10 minutes, trying to calm his anger. Something about this woman had gotten under his skin. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't insulted him, hadn't even argued, yet somehow she'd made him feel small. It was infuriating. He wrote the citation, adding every petty charge he could think of. Failure to maintain lane, improper speed, failure to signal. None of it was true, but his word against hers would hold up in traffic court. When he returned to her vehicle, Sarah was still recording. Here's your citation. Sign here. Sarah read through it carefully. Officer Reynolds, this citation contains several inaccuracies. I was not speeding. I maintained my lane, and I signaled properly. That's what the court is for. Sign it. Signing doesn't indicate guilt, correct? Just sign the damn thing. Sarah signed with her full name, Colonel Sarah E. Mitchell, USA. Reynolds glanced at the signature but didn't really read it. Drive carefully, he said with mock concern. Wouldn't want you to have another accident. Officer Reynolds, Sarah said as he started to walk away. I want your badge number and the complaint procedure for this department. He turned back, furious. You want to file a complaint? Go ahead. Nobody's going to believe your word over mine. We'll see about that. Something in her tone, absolute confidence without bravado, sent a chill down his spine. But he pushed it aside. She was just another traffic stop, another person he'd properly put in her place. As Reynolds drove away, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, processing what had just happened. She'd faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, commanded troops in Iraq, and navigated Pentagon politics for over 2 decades. But this kind of racial harassment still had the power to shake her. She looked at the citation again, noting every false charge. Then she picked up her phone. Captain Rodriguez, this is Colonel Mitchell. I need you to document something for me. I was just subjected to what appears to be racially motivated harassment by a local police officer. Reynolds, meanwhile, returned to the station feeling satisfied. Another successful stop, another civilian properly intimidated. He filed his report without giving it much thought, describing the stop as routine and the driver as argumentative and suspicious. He had no idea he'd just pulled over one of the highest-ranking officers at Fort Stewart, a decorated combat veteran with direct access to military legal counsel and federal civil rights investigators. 3 days later, Sarah sat in the office of Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, the staff judge advocate at Fort Stewart. She'd brought the citation, her phone recording, and a detailed written account of the incident. This is clearly racial profiling, Wright said after reviewing everything, and the charges are obviously fabricated. I want to handle this properly, James. By the book. We could involve the FBI's Civil Rights Division. This crosses federal jurisdiction since you were on official travel. Not yet. Let's see how the local system responds first. Give them a chance to do the right thing. And if they don't, Sarah's expression was steely. Then we escalate. Wright smiled grimly. He'd served with Sarah in Afghanistan and knew better than to underestimate her patience or her resolve. The complaint Sarah filed with the Millbrook Police Department was initially ignored. When she called to follow up, she was told the investigating officer was unavailable and her complaint was under review. After 2 weeks of bureaucratic stonewalling, Sarah made another call. Colonel Thompson, this is Sarah Mitchell. I need a favor. Colonel David Thompson was a friend from her days at West Point, now working in the Inspector General's office. After hearing her story, he was quietly furious. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of thing we've been tracking. Local law enforcement overstepping with military personnel. I just want equal treatment under the law. You'll get it. And more. Within 48 hours, the Millbrook Police Department received a formal inquiry from the Army's Inspector General's office, requesting all documentation related to the traffic stop of Colonel Sarah Mitchell on November 15th. Chief of Police Robert Harrison had been in law enforcement for 30 years, but he'd never received a call from the Pentagon. When he read Sarah's rank and learned about her military record, his blood ran cold. He immediately called Reynolds into his office. Mike, tell me about this traffic stop from last month. Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell. Reynolds shrugged. Routine stop. Driver was argumentative. Possibly impaired. Possibly impaired. Harrison held up the citation. You didn't charge her with DUI. Well, no. But she seemed off. Off how? Confrontational. Didn't show proper respect. Harrison stared at him. Mike. Do you know who you pulled over? Some government worker. Why? Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Army, combat veteran. She commands more soldiers than our entire department has officers. The color drained from Reynolds' face. She's filed a formal complaint alleging racial profiling and harassment. The Army Inspector General is investigating. The FBI might get involved. Reynolds sat down heavily. Chief, I was just doing my job. Were you? Because I've reviewed your reports. You've made a lot of stops in that area lately, all involving black drivers, all with questionable probable cause. That's not... Mike, I'm suspending you pending investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon. Reynolds' world began crumbling. His position, his authority, his sense of identity, all tied to that badge, was slipping away. Chief, this isn't fair. She was disrespectful. She was a decorated military officer driving home from work, and you treated her like a criminal because of her race. I don't see color. Bullshit. Harrison slammed down the file. I've got 15 similar stops, Mike. All black drivers, all questionable stops, all in the same area. The pattern is undeniable. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a call from Chief Harrison personally. Colonel Mitchell, I want to apologize for the treatment you received from one of my officers. We've opened a full investigation. I appreciate that, Chief. I hope the investigation is thorough. It will be. May I ask, are you planning to pursue federal charges? Sarah paused. That depends on what justice looks like at the local level. I understand. We're taking this very seriously. Good. Because this isn't just about me. This is about how your department treats all citizens. The investigation revealed what Sarah had suspected. Reynolds had a pattern of targeting black drivers with pretextual stops. Internal Affairs found 15 similar incidents in the past year alone. But Reynolds wasn't going quietly. He hired a lawyer and claimed he was being scapegoated for doing his job. The union backed him, arguing that traffic stops were inherently subjective and that second-guessing officers' decisions would endanger public safety. The case was headed to court. Sarah could have let the military handle it through administrative channels. She could have accepted an apology and moved on. Instead, she chose to see it through the civilian justice system, believing that accountability needed to be public and transparent. On the morning of the hearing, Sarah arrived at the Millbrook County Courthouse in her full-dress uniform, the blue jacket with silver eagles on the shoulders, 4 rows of ribbons including the Bronze Star and Combat Action Badge, paratrooper wings, the visual representation of a career spent serving her country. Reynolds was already there, with his lawyer, looking confident. He'd won these cases before. His word against the civilians usually carried weight with local judges. But when Sarah walked into the courtroom, everything changed. The bailiff called out, "All rise for Colonel Sarah Mitchell." Reynolds turned around and felt his knees go weak. The woman he'd humiliated was clearly not just any government worker. The uniform, the rank, the bearing. It was obvious she outranked everyone in the building. Judge Patricia Hawkins, a retired Air Force JAG officer herself, looked at Sarah with professional respect. "Colonel Mitchell, thank you for your service. Please be seated." Sarah's testimony was precise, factual, and devastating. She presented her evidence methodically: the phone recording, the false charges on the citation, the timeline of events. Her military bearing and credibility were unassailable. When Reynolds took the stand, his story began falling apart under cross-examination. Sergeant Reynolds, you testified that Colonel Mitchell was driving erratically, yet you charged her with driving 34 mph in a 35 mph zone. How is driving under the speed limit erratic? Well, you also charged her with failure to signal. Yet the recording shows she used her turn signal when pulling over for your stop. I must have missed that.
You missed a lot of things, didn't you?
Including the fact that you were harassing a decorated combat veteran. I didn't know she was military. Would it have mattered? Of course not, really, because your pattern suggests otherwise. The prosecutor presented evidence of Reynolds' other stops, all involving black drivers, all with questionable probable cause, all in the same area of town. Sergeant Reynolds, in your 15-year career, how many white drivers have you pulled over in the Oakwood neighborhood? I don't keep track of race. That's interesting. Because we do. 0. You've made 47 stops in that area in the past year. All black drivers. What's your explanation for that statistic? Reynolds had no answer. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Sergeant Reynolds, your testimony lacks credibility. The evidence clearly shows this was a pretextual stop, motivated by racial bias. You violated Colonel Mitchell's civil rights and then falsified charges to cover your actions. Sarah watched from the gallery as Reynolds' face crumbled. The man who'd tried to intimidate her with his badge was being held accountable by the very system he'd abused. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins continued, your pattern of targeting black drivers represents a systemic abuse of police power that undermines public trust and violates the constitutional rights of citizens. Reynolds was found guilty on multiple charges: civil rights violations, filing false reports, and abuse of authority. He was immediately terminated from the police force and faced potential federal charges. After the hearing, reporters surrounded Sarah outside the courthouse. Colonel Mitchell, what do you hope comes from this case? I hope it sends a message that no one is above the law, not police officers who abuse their authority, and not the systems that protect them. Do you think this will change anything? Change happens when people demand accountability. When we refuse to accept that this is just how things are. What would you say to other victims of police harassment? Sarah looked directly into the camera. Document everything. Know your rights. And never let anyone make you feel like you deserve to be treated as less than human because of your race. The story made national news. Video of Sarah in her military uniform, standing with quiet dignity outside the courthouse, became a powerful symbol of the fight for civil rights and police accountability. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't the headlines or the legal judgment. It was the letter she received a week later from a young black man in Millbrook. Colonel Mitchell, my name is Marcus. I'm 19 years old, and I've been stopped by police 6 times in the past year, always for broken taillights or suspicious behavior. I never knew I could fight back. Your courage gave me hope that things can change. Thank you for showing me that our dignity is worth defending. Sarah framed that letter and kept it on her office wall, a reminder that standing up for justice ripples far beyond any single case. Reynolds, meanwhile, found himself unemployable in law enforcement. His name was associated nationally with police misconduct. He lost his house, his pension, and his reputation, but the story wasn't over. 6 months later, Reynolds approached Sarah through her lawyer, requesting a meeting. Against her advisor's recommendations, she agreed. They met in a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Savannah. Reynolds looked older, humbled, broken in ways that went beyond his legal troubles. Colonel Mitchell, I owe you an apology. Sarah studied him carefully. Go on. I was wrong. Not just about that night, but about everything. The way I treated you, the way I treated other people. I let my badge make me think I was better than I am. What changed? Losing everything gave me time to think. Really think about who I'd become. He paused. I went through some old arrest records. Saw the pattern everyone was talking about. I didn't want to believe it, but it's all there. I targeted black drivers. I told myself it was good police work. But it was just prejudice. Sarah remained silent, letting him continue. I know you don't owe me anything, but I wanted you to know that what happened that night, it changed me. Not just getting caught, but seeing how you handled it. You could have destroyed me in a dozen different ways, but you just wanted justice. What are you doing now? Community service, mostly. Working with a group that provides legal aid to people who've been harassed by police. Trying to make up for some of the damage I did. Sarah nodded slowly. Mike? I appreciate you coming here. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. Not as much courage as you showed. Standing up to someone with a badge when you're alone on a dark road. I wasn't alone. I had 20 years of military training, federal resources, and institutional support. Most people don't have those advantages. That's why what you did matters so much. You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for everyone who couldn't fight back. They talked for another hour. Reynolds asked about her military service, her career, her family. Sarah found herself seeing him as a human being, rather than just the symbol of everything wrong with policing. As they prepared to leave, Reynolds had one more thing to say. Colonel, I know this sounds hollow coming from me, but I hope you know that there are good cops out there, people who got into this job to help people, not to power trip. I know that, Mike. That's why accountability matters. Good cops should want bad cops held responsible. They do, at least the ones I've been working with do. Sarah stood to leave, then paused. Mike, the work you're doing now, helping people who've been harassed, that's important. Don't stop. I won't. It's the least I can do. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the conversation. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about the possibility of redemption, about systems changing, about people growing. The traffic stop that night had lasted 20 minutes. The legal case had taken 8 months. But the real impact on policing practices, on public awareness, on the hundreds of people who'd been inspired to stand up for their rights, would last much longer. 3 years later, Sarah received an invitation to speak at the Millbrook Police Department's new Community Relations Training Program. The department had undergone major reforms, including mandatory bias training, body cameras for all officers, and a civilian oversight board. Chief Harrison introduced her to the new recruits. This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell. 3 years ago, one of our officers violated her civil rights during a traffic stop. Instead of just filing a complaint and moving on, she fought for accountability. Because of her courage, this department is better today. Sarah looked out at the young faces, black, white, Hispanic, male, female, all preparing to carry badges and serve their community. Your badge is not a weapon, she told them. It's a symbol of the trust the community places in you. That trust must be earned every day, with every interaction. She paused, thinking of that night 3 years ago. You will meet people from all walks of life. Some will be afraid of you because of the uniform, others will challenge your authority. Your job is to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, their attitude, or your assumptions about who they are. After her speech, a young black officer approached her. Colonel Mitchell, thank you for what you did. I almost didn't join the force because of stories like yours, but seeing how the department changed, it gave me hope that I could be part of the solution. Sarah smiled. That's exactly why it was worth fighting for. That evening, as Sarah drove home through Millbrook, she passed the spot where Reynolds had pulled her over. The memory was still there, but it no longer carried the sting of injustice. Instead, it reminded her of the power of standing up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, now in her first year at West Point. Saw your speech online, Mom. Proud to follow in your footsteps. Sarah smiled. The fight for justice was never really about one person, one case, one moment. It was about building a better world for the next generation. A world where a young officer's badge represents service, not power, where a black woman driving home doesn't have to fear harassment, where courage and dignity triumph over prejudice and abuse. The road ahead was long, but Sarah Mitchell had proven that sometimes one person's refusal to be intimidated could change everything. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Still the same person who'd been pulled over 3 years ago, but now part of a larger story about accountability. justice, and the courage to demand better. She'd commanded troops in combat zones and navigated Pentagon politics. But that night on a dark Georgia road had become her most important mission, proving that in America, no one, no matter how powerful their badge, should be above the law. This story reminds us that true authority comes not from the power to intimidate, but from the courage to do what's right. When we stand up to injustice, we don't just protect ourselves, we protect everyone who comes after us. If this story moved you, remember, your voice matters, your rights matter, and your dignity is worth defending.